Welcome to Living Grounded, where each week we sit down with guests from all walks of life to explore their stories, their experiences, and their faith journeys. We always ask this question: how does this walk with Jesus work out in real life? What's it look like? Well, have you ever felt completely drained? Not just tired, but like something deeper inside of you has kind of gone dim or dull. That's called burnout. And today we want to get real about that. What exactly is burnout? What does it feel like when you're in it? What causes it? How can you spot the warning signs? And most importantly, how do you recover from burnout? Now, whether you're in the thick of it or you're just feeling the slow creep of exhaustion, this episode is for you. Let's talk openly and honestly and without shame about this issue that has potentially hit us all. Maybe you're in it right now. Today, my conversation is with Debbie Schratz. Debbie is a Christian therapist that will help us work through this challenging topic, and we're going to do it in a biblical way. Debbie teaches at Geneva College, Liberty University, Carlow University, and the Portage Learning Center. So here's my conversation with Debbie Schratz. Well, Debbie, thanks so much for joining us again. We appreciate you coming back.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we got some great response from the last time that you were here. And actually, we have a few things that we want to talk with you about over the next several weeks and months. And so thank you for agreeing to that. I think those who are watching and listening, man, this is like real life stuff.
Sure, exactly.
That's going on. So today we want to talk about this topic, probably described in 100 different ways, right?
Right.
But the word that most people use is burnout. Mm-hmm. And we're talking to a lot of young moms who are burning the candles at both ends while they're doing remote work and holding down a full-time or part-time job. Right. A lot of activities and a lot of different things going on. We're talking to dads as well that are trying to make ends meet in an economy. They don't know if they're going to have their job next year. Just all kinds of stuff. And then we have all these internal things, right?
Right.
that just so let's just so make sure everyone's on the same page. When we say burnout, what is that?
I think you just really described everything in the podcast, so I can just leave now. So burnout is more of a state. It's not a diagnosis. It's an ongoing state of kind of feeling overwhelmed, fatigued, emotionally drained due to compounding demands and stressors in your life. And it's just, for some people, it's to the point of just feeling like they're going to collapse.
Okay. So talk about personalities, because I do better when I'm under stress. Mm-hmm. If there's a deadline, I'll push for that. I can feel it physically, but I kind of need that. If I know it's not going to happen soon, I'll put things off a little bit to do something else.
Right.
I'm not saying that's good, and I'm not saying that's healthy, but talk about the different personalities, because some people, it's like they can do 50 different things, and they're saying, man, I got a lot going on, and it's overwhelming at times, but they get it done. And then other people, maybe half of that, and they kind of hit a wall.
Right. Well, burnout is really complex. It's a lot of factors involved. And you are right. Some people can handle stress better than others. And I think that's really the underlying issue with burnout, is the inability to handle stressful or compounding stressful, right? Because our body is made in a way that we can handle stress and our body does what it does and we get through it. But there are certain things that kind of contribute to burnout, and I think it's overwhelming, a bunch of different things. So you talked about personalities, and there are personality traits through research that are more prone to become burnout, and the reason why is because of an inability to handle stress. So I'll give you an example. Someone who is, and we talked a little bit about this with anxiety, but somebody who is more of an anxious person who's a worrier, someone who has a lot of negative emotions, maybe cynical. You've met these kind of people where everything is kind of an issue and their response to stress is always just very negative. Those type of people are more prone to burnout because they don't have that ability to handle stressful situations. They don't have the coping mechanisms. Other personality types, like introverts, for example, introverts need to recharge. So if they have a lot of demands put on them, then they might feel overwhelmed. They might not be able to be alone, escape, and do that recharging that they need. So when stressful things compound on them, they don't know how to handle it. Perfectionist type A people put a lot of unattainable goals on themselves, high expectations. They put them on themselves, they put them on other people in their family. And that kind of creates an atmosphere for stress in itself because they might, they have these expectations of other people. The other people don't share those same expectations, and then it kind of causes this cluster of stress in the family. People pleasers. So, and keep in mind with some of these things that there could be other underlying issues, mental health issues. Why is a person a people pleaser? But if you think about a people pleaser, they put other people above themselves at all times to their own detriment. And people pleasers, they do this not necessarily because they want to, but out of a fear of being unloved, fear of not being accepted, and they don't like conflict. So that personality trait is not able to handle stressful situations long term because they are not recharged themselves. Workaholics put work above everything else. There's a poor work-family life balance. So when stressful things happen to them, again, they're not able to handle it. So you talked about the people that actually can handle stress. They might have a better work-life balance. They might not have the demands like some jobs have, like doctors or EMTs, for example. They're just kind of just full of stressful times, long hours, traumatic events. That does something to your body. And part of what that does to your body is an inability to handle stress. We as counselors have what kind of a term called vicarious trauma. I don't know if you've ever heard it. And
Vicarious?
Vicarious. So like living vicariously.
So you're talking to people who are going through something all the time, and that's becoming your problem as well as theirs.
100%. And it really affects counselors who take care of people who've been abused, children. Like I used to work with a lot of children who were sexually and physically abused, and the stories you hear daily are heart-wrenching. And you get to a point where you may not be taking care of yourself the way you should. You're going, and you start to feel these effects of their trauma on you vicariously, and that leads to burnout. And it's a hot topic term for counselors for the last 10 years. There's lots of research on it. But someone like that who has a high demanding job is more susceptible to experiencing burnout.
We actually talked to a doctor who, a great podcast, and he kind of hit the wall. He experienced burnout, and it was through COVID, where he was trying to, see people, and then that was stressful because of masks and people not coming into the office, and then trying to see them over Zoom or calls, and then doing all the paperwork at home, and it kind of hit a wall, which we'll talk about in a second. But I want to go back to something. So let's say your personality is there's going to be a better word. You can correct me at any time when I say a wrong word. All right, but from an outside, it's a lot of drama, right? It's dramatic,
like neuroticism.
Okay, okay. And so like something little happened, and it's like the world is falling apart.
Right.
You mentioned coping mechanisms. So talk to that person so they know that, it's like the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Well, that straw is whatever's next, right? What are some coping what are some things that they could like tell themselves, again, as believers, we're wanting God to speak to us. There's scripture we can go to and those things. We'll talk about those. But what are some things that person could say, okay, take a deep breath, whatever the coping mechanisms are?
Right. Well, it really depends on your level of burnout. So if you're talking about a person that and we'll talk about red flags and how that brain works, but if you're talking about a person that definitely is burned out, right? The forefront, I think the main thing to do first as a counselor or anybody that you're talking to, you want to relieve their stress. The goal is reduce the stress. So how do you do that? You have to start with the foundation. So if it's somebody who has more neuroticism types where they're kind of negative or they're, having issues, you want to start with psychoeducation. And it really is going to depend on the person, but you want to start working on explaining to them what burnout is and what it's all about as far as learning to have these coping mechanisms that deal with decreasing stress. And there can be a lot of it. So I talk about, and I'm kind of jumping a little bit ahead, but it's kind of twofold with working with burnout. First of all, it is reducing the stress, but then it's about lifestyle changes. So for someone like you were talking about, you have to start with step one, giving them the tools, whatever those tools may be, whether it be as a believer, spending more time. They talk about mindfulness a lot in the world, but I'm talking about more spending time in quiet with the Lord in His Word, praying. Even Jesus had to, go away from the crowd to rest. So whatever that looks like for that person, whether it be learning, getting the education behind why they're feeling the way they are, whether it is breathing techniques or grounding techniques, kind of doing those counseling techniques that we've all heard about. But more importantly, once they have that foundation, is to look at their lifestyle changes. So if it's somebody with the personality issues, not necessarily personality issues, but their personality kind of lends them to be burnt out, we would work on things like a people pleaser, for example. I would talk to them about setting boundaries. I would talk to them about self-care. We talk about self-care all the time, but most people really don't do it. Some people find it maybe selfish, or maybe they're afraid it's going to be selfish. But to anybody dealing with burnout, I would say, let's look at what self-care is, for you. What does that mean? Spending a few minutes by yourself, going on a run, just spending some quiet time. But I think too, when I work with people, one of the things I like to talk to them about is, what is your stressor? What is your resources? Because people can identify stressors in their lives. For the most part, they might know, like the doctor you were talking about, he probably knows that he's got a lot of hours and there's a lot of demands on him. But does he think about what his resources are? And oftentimes we don't. And as a therapist, I like to point out, okay, you have a stressor. Let's brainstorm. Let's do a life map or something that we can see what resources you have, so that can kind of alleviate these stressors that you're feeling.
So talk to the person who they would say, okay, my stressor is the person I work for. All right? And I can't quit working, but man, when I go into a meeting, I can kind of feel, my blood pressure going up, and I can't get away from this. So, are there things that you can do? Like you can't avoid this situation,
right?
Are there things you can do within that will help you get through it in a way that doesn't become a really exhausting hour of your life?
That's tough, because I've had a tough boss I worked with once, and it was brutal going to work. You can't control other people. I always tell, that's an expectation that sometimes you have. It's like maybe you can control the other person, but you have to get that out of your mind. You have to kind of just work on what you are able to handle and what's in front of you, what you can do. So if you have a work situation that's kind of toxic, that is tough. That is a hard question to answer, because the only thing I would tell my clients is, what can you do to kind of make yourself feel better, not be so stressed, because you're going to be stressed. You're going to feel nervous. So those would be going back to the self-care, going back to whatever you can control, learning these techniques, breathing techniques, maybe, obviously spending more time praying about it. You know, God changes the hearts of people. And I believe that in situations you can have, you know, your boss even maybe change the way they approach you. You know, and I always tell people, you know, think about, you don't know what's going on in the mind or the life of the people you work with. They might be going through something rough as well. But you kind of are in a situation where it's a little bit tough because you can't do anything about that, but you can only take care of yourself. So you have to learn to not be anxious when you get into work. As easy as that sounds, I know it's not so easy, but if you put things into practice, as far as spending time, again, quality time with yourself, you know, finding out what techniques you might work with that person. And again, I don't know what your boss is doing to you. You know, are you able to seek a supervisor? Are you able to get supervision with somebody else to kind of work out those personality issues within the job? And I do hear a lot of people have this problem. And again, I had it too. And I tell you that I left the job.
And we're not talking about. You know, we're not talking about if you're being verbally abused or whatever. We're in a different ballpark there. But we're just talking about that. So it's interesting, isn't it? We have these things going on in our life. We all are going to be around challenging people.
Right.
We're going to see someone, and it's crazy because we physically get tense.
Right. We
kind of want to turn the other way. We don't want to enter into a conversation with them. So we have all that going on. And as a believer, spiritually, then we're thinking, okay, God, I need to depend on you, and I want to trust in you.
Right.
And what are you teaching me through this situation? And so God's not wasting our time. So it's an interesting, I don't even want to say balance, because it's always going to start with the spiritual, but it's interesting as we work through spiritual things and how that impacts us emotionally and physically.
Right. And that is interesting you say that, because I know going through some stuff myself, and I'm always asking God, okay, God, you're showing me something through this. It doesn't feel good, but I know you have a plan for me. I know that there's something bigger that you have in this situation, especially when it's involving personalities that clash. Those are tough ones, you know, and I do believe God gives you the strength and gives you the grace to get through those, but it's going to take a lot of prayer. And I think a lot of times people think things are solved overnight, and none of this is solved overnight. You know, learning coping mechanisms, or, you know, recovering from burnout, these aren't things that it didn't happen overnight. It's not going to get solved overnight either. So I think it's important for people to understand that there is a process with all these things, and not to get down and feel defeated when things aren't 100% going the way it should go.
Right. So we do know this as a believer. Even in the most challenging time, God hadn't abandoned us. He hadn't forsaken us. He's right there with us.
Right.
So I had a friend, man, he was a mover and a shaker in Pittsburgh. And I met him one day, and he said, I haven't met you for a while, but I got to tell you, I hit a wall. And he said, I don't know what happened, but he said, like, there's one day I couldn't get out of bed. And he said, this is going to happen to you, because he said, our personalities are a lot alike. So you better do something different. And he told me some of the things he was doing differently, not going into work as much, working more from home. This was before COVID. So if we had the textbook definition of burnout, we hit a wall. We are not functioning well. The energy is gone. Just to think about moving into that day, we can't. We literally can't. Right. So that's burnout. So what we want to talk about, before we hit the wall, what are some of the red flags that a person needs to say, man, I'm headed in a unhealthy direction here.
Right.
So I need to stop right. I don't want to get there, so I need to stop. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about people who have hit that wall. What do you do to recover? So let's start with the red flag.
Right.
So we talked about what causes burnout, stress, personality, just life. I mean, life
demands.
comes at life comes at us at the speed of life, right? So it's just something's going on. I mean, your job situation. I don't know how many different places you teach,
right?
And you have things with your father, and you have kids, and you have family. You have the whole bit. So you got a lot of balls in the air.
Yeah.
And so, Debbie, how would you say? Okay, start with you. Okay, let's get personal. So when I start feeling like this, I know. Okay, time out.
Right.
I got to do something. So.
Right. So I'll
counselor,
tell you,
counsel the counselor.
I'll tell you what I do, and then I think it's really important to understand like that brain connection. But for me, I do hit walls sometimes, and I really do. And I was actually talking to my daughter about this, and she said something that was like, she's like, I didn't realize this happens to you because sometimes you seem kind of like a wall. That nothing bothers you. And I said, well, that's not really true because a lot of things bother me. You just don't see it. And I spend a lot of time praying. But for me, when I know when it's time to do something is when I have a crying breakdown where something will happen and it might be little. And that's the thing with burnout because it's kind of like, it's like all piling on you. And as you said, you can work through some of the stressors and you can do it well. But then it might be that little feather that falls on you that just kind of throws you completely off. And that'll happen to me every so often. And a lot of things are going on.
I don't want to interrupt, but that's weird, isn't it? Because that happens and you say, I handled all this other stuff.
Right.
Why is this bothering me so much?
I know. And we'll talk about how the brain kind of works its way that way. But this happened to me just a few weeks ago because my husband is off in training in Colorado for 5 weeks. And I'm, watch the grandkids. I help with my dad. I'm teaching and having a lot of physical issues. And that's really a red flag right there is when you start to feel physically in your body, especially if you're aware of what's going on in your body and you feel something's not right. Mine is my neck issues. I went into my room. I couldn't get out. And I just cried. And I just was like, life is over. I don't want to do this anymore. And it's not like me, and I really hate even admitting that, but I think it's important to know that it's okay. You can have these things, but don't stay down there, So for me, I had that great support with my husband, and he actually took time off work to really help me. Just like, he's like, I really think you need me right now, so I'm going to kind of help you out. And it is what I needed. I needed self-care. I needed to do things for myself because I tend to be a people pleaser. I don't like conflict. I don't like it when even my family members are mad at me, and I will perseverate, just dwell on those things. And it's ridiculous. I'm a counselor. And my husband will like, aren't you a counselor? I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm also human. So I think it's really important to know that. So that happened to me. I knew that I was neglecting my prayer time. I was being complacent. I was doing my little devotional and thinking that was enough. And it wasn't. I really needed to dive in there. And I think God was trying to get my attention. And he did get it. And so I kind of got myself back recharged, I guess, so to speak.
So a red flag would be kind of an emotional, I'm not saying an emotional breakdown, but an emotional time where there may be tears, there may be anger, there may be something that you just say, this is not normal. Is it?
Right.
Is I saying that right?
Right. And I think it's important to understand why we feel that way, why like my mood was affected. So remember when we talked about anxiety and I talked about that fight or flight response, how it's just a amazing part of our body that when we have like adverse stress or a threatening situation, our body can respond to it naturally without us thinking about it. I talked about the amygdala and I talked about, how it sends signals. Well, with burnout and with stressors, there is a mechanism that's a part of our normal fight or flight. And it's called the HPA axis. HPA. And that stands for hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I'll stay with the APA.
HPA.
Okay. HPA. Okay.
HPA, yeah. So HPA is a normal part of that fight or flight, as I said. And what its job is that the amygdala signals the HPA to release stress hormone, specifically cortisol, into the body when we are finding ourselves in a very stressful situation that could be life-threatening, but it's just stress in general. So your body gets flooded with cortisol because if you know anything about cortisol causes adrenaline. It's really like that source of energy we have in our body, and we need that. But cortisol also has a lot to do with mood. So whenever we're compounded with stressors, our brain becomes rewired, just like I was talking about with anxiety. And so it basically dysregulates that HPA axis and it floods our body with cortisol. So when that happens, some of the red flags that you see from the extra stressors and burnout will be behavioral issues where you might have issues with your mood, like I did, where I was just kind of just flopping on the ground crying. Mm-hmm. But you'll have things like, I'm sure you've heard, brain fog, difficulty concentrating, memory issues. Those are some of the behavioral issues that can be red flags to people that they don't normally, might have, like increased irritability. You might see a person like, I'm not usually irritable. So if I become irritable, then that's a trigger for me thinking, I need to step back for a second. But additionally, with that increase in cortisol, it can cause mental and physical red flags, such as issues with sleeping. It can cause fatigue. You've heard of adrenal fatigue, chronic fatigue. Those are all things from having dysregulation of that HPA axis. But also cortisol, too much cortisol suppresses your immune system, so it puts you at more of a susceptibility for illnesses. So if you feel like, and this isn't always the case, so it's always good to kind of talk to your doctor and things like that. But if you know yourself, be aware. If you know that you're not normally irritable, if you know that you're not normally fatigued, and all of a sudden you're feeling fatigued, it's a good time to do some self-examination.
Mm-hmm. Or we would probably say, I'm close to burnout all the time because I'm always irritable.
Well, then that's a norm for you.
I got to work. That's my norm. Lori, that's my norm.
That's your foundation.
This is not a red flag. This is my norm.
Right. A red flag would maybe when you're not irritable.
I'm going to try that the next time. So when you were talking about the brain and how we're wired and adrenaline and all that, I was just thinking of the passage, we are fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yes.
Isn't it amazing how God has wired us and has all these things in our mind and our brain, and it releases certain things at certain times to
perfect timing, yeah,
allow us to adapt to it. It's just amazing.
Right.
And what's so amazing about, we had a grandchild that had trisomy 18, so an extra chromosome. When it's a normal pregnancy and birth, you think, this is fantastic, praise the Lord. When it's not, you start to realize one little thing goes wrong and everything is impacted. Right. And you just realize, man, we really are fearfully and wonderfully made. Right. In the emotional realm, which there's a counselor way to say this, but it's really wholeness. Like we divide up emotional. When I'm writing, Job, I'm going through Job right now. Job was done mentally, emotionally, and physically. And, those are three words that go together and sound good in writing. But really, it's all a whole, isn't it? Spiritually,
mind, body,
it's
soul.
just a whole.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so when we're dealing with those things, it's going to impact us spiritually.
Right.
It's going to impact our emotions in relationships. Right. It's going to impact us mentally. Right. Again, it's just amazing how all those things are threaded together.
Right. Because he gives us the tools. And that's what's interesting is stress is, I don't want to say normal, but it kind of is. It's part of being human. Stress isn't all bad. As you were talking earlier, sometimes stress motivates us to get things done. There is normal parts of stress. Like if you're studying for an exam, for example, it's not abnormal to be a little anxious and a little bit stressful about that. And your body adapts to that stressor as God amazingly made us to do all these things when we face something stressful. But the idea that God planned is for your body to do what it needs to do to get you through that stressful issue or that threatening event. And then the body has to go back to what we call rest and digest.
Okay.
Like homeostasis, basically. So we have to get back to that calmness. That
what?
Homeostasis.
Okay.
So it's basically, kind of that.
Same spot.
Right. I don't know. I hate to use the word normal because we're all like versions of abnormal, but your body is not meant to have your heart rate being rapid all the time. It's not meant for your blood pressure to be through the roof and your respirations to be high. It's normal if you're expecting or experiencing stress. That's how God made us to get through it. But then your body has to go back to rest, which I think is really important because, again, we need rest. We need self-care. Jesus needed rest and self-care. And, there's so many scriptures in the Bible that talk about, he'll give you rest, And so I think it's really important to understand that.
So I was thinking of an athlete, a football player getting ready to take the field. Their stress is going to be really high. Their heartbeat's going to be higher.
Adrenaline.
And and they're getting ready for that game. But you can't live your whole life doing that.
Right.
So Debbie, talked to the young mom. And I just talked to a young mom just a little bit ago. So she has a 9, a 7, a 5, and a 3. So about every stage, from really a lot of care with the 3 to the 11, getting ready to a lot of activities.
Right.
She's running this way and that, getting the kids to school and then the activities. And so she's listening and she's saying, I'm not like an athlete taking a field. I could handle that. I could handle the stress high and then the game. And then in fact, they are athlete. They experience that. But it's like this, I'm not breathing hard, like taking the field hard.
Right.
I'm not like stressed, like taking the field, the adrenaline, but it's just like always here.
It's a steady amount of stressors that you're battling with.
Yeah. Talk to that. So that person comes in and they just say, I'm not burned out. I don't want to be burned out, but I don't think I can sustain where I am right now.
Right.
So talk to them mentally, spiritually, and physically.
Well, I think it's good if they're not experiencing quite the burnout. I think that's one of the things that we talked about earlier is recognizing the stress, but then trying to find a resource. So I think that's good when you kind of know that you're heading that way and so you're really wanting to do something about it. So as a therapist, I've had families come in and it's really important to understand what their level of ability to cope with stress is. So with a new mom, it's really kind of difficult because, again, I don't know if she just had a recent baby, but, you're dealing with hormonal fluctuations. You're dealing with, transporting your kids here and there, and it's a lot on a person. So I would want to kind of teach them some coping mechanisms to kind of deal foundationally with stress. Because if you can't deal with stress, if you don't have the equipment to be strong during stressful situations and kind of like get yourself above water, then you're going to fall flat into burnout. So I would have, I would work treatment plan working on, just some things specific, psychoeducation, interventions, maybe some strategies for time management, things like that. And then we would go into what's the lifestyle like. So, it's not abnormal for new moms or moms of young kids to be stressed because a lot is required of them. So, I just, just a little side thing. I just read an article in Newsweek in February talking about this epidemic of parental burnout. And it spoke to like 57% of the people surveyed were burnt out. And some of this was because of competing. They were looking at other families who are doing what they're doing. So there's a lot of competition going with families. And for someone who's a mom, there's going to be, what are they doing with their family? What are they involved in? What can be shed, right? So I think it's about, like I said, time management. It's about looking at your life and what's going on, and is there resources to be had? Mm-hmm. Can they have a grandparent? Like I'm one grandparent. My son has, his mother-in-law, and my daughter the same. There's grandparents on both sides that they've reached out to help. So that's a resource. Your church is a resource. And if you're talking about that spiritually, there's lots of moms groups and support groups. Mm-hmm. I know there's groups here. So can you reach out to a support group? Can you reach out to a friend? Reach out to your pastor? Can you delegate things in your household? So, you might have a husband who's, maybe you're a stay-at-home mom and your husband's working. He's a little stressed with his job. He comes home. The family's stressed because the mom is stressed. So it's really important to kind of have family meetings to kind of talk these things out. A lot of families don't do that. They're so busy with everything that they neglect that. They neglect that time where they can kind of group as a family and say, okay, here's what we're doing. We're not spending time together. We're kind of neglecting our relationship. The kids are this way, that way. What can we do to kind of make that maybe a little bit more doable? So, again, setting boundaries, reaching out for help, time management, examine expectations. What are you expecting? And, are you expecting too much and you're not getting back? So, that's kind of how I would handle a family, a new mom, is kind of give them some suggestions that they could do. But definitely resources are the key.
And you're not superwoman.
Right.
And you don't have to be superwoman, and no one expects that. And all the Facebook posts and Instagram posts, it's not real life.
Right. The influencers.
Yeah,
that's a big thing, by the way, because, and this can affect that personality type of being a perfectionist. So I follow some Instagram influencers that I really enjoy, but it's not realistic because they're presenting a package, because they're selling things usually for Amazon or Target. They present perfectly dressed, all together. Their children are perfectly dressed. Their home looks like it's in a magazine. That's not practical. Mm-hmm. It's fun to get ideas, but if you take that too far, it's going to really lead to a lot of stress, which can lead to burnout, because you're like, oh, with this family, look at the way their house is. Their kids don't look disheveled like mine do. Why is that? You have to stop comparing and competing.
You mentioned, and I think that's critical, and I think there's a book out called The Anxious Generation, and it's just talking about our kids today spending so much time on the screen.
Right.
Everybody's comparing themselves to someone else that's unrealistic to begin with.
Right.
And yet it's tempting to do that.
Right.
And we can all do that in some ways or another. You talked about weekly meetings in our marriage enrichment curriculum. One of the things we do is encourage the couples, one of their assignments is to do weekly meetings. Mm-hmm. And Lori and I started in the research when I was doing my doctorate in the research, whether it was secular or Christian, these weekly meetings. I thought that sounds so basic, right? But there it is again, and there it is again, and there it is again. So we implemented it into the curriculum and then explained how to do it. But one of the things that Lori and I did is started doing weekly meetings. And when our kids were younger, family meetings, you mentioned that, and we did it on Sunday nights. We wanted everyone there as much as possible. Right. Everyone was there. We had scripture and we recorded our prayers. So it was that time as well. But then we would just say, okay, what's everyone have going on this week? And that reduced so much stress because, Lori wasn't calling me at work and saying, hey, don't forget at 4:00 someone has to be here. I mean, I can't do that. I got a meeting at 4. And then she said, well, I have to get this kid over here.
And it's about communication, and if you are involved in a stressful job and you're, let's face it, most of our lives have some degree of stress in it. If you're not getting together and talking about things and even sharing. We as counselors get supervision, and that's where we share our struggles and our clients. You should do that too in your marriage and in your family. Share what's going on. Again, if I'm a people pleaser and I can talk to my children and say, okay, I'm going to have to set some boundaries because I find myself just saying yes all the time because I don't want you to be mad at me. But that's not healthy, and that's not really how good relationships are, because it's not based in love and honesty and truth. So I think part of that, even when your kids are grown up and gone, it's important to have that communication and talk to family members, because they are our support system.
Talk to the person who has the inclination to take on all the problems of the world. They got their own issues. They got their own stressors they're dealing with. But they have a friend from college who texts them and says, hey, just pray for us. We're having a marriage issue. And all of a sudden that becomes they want to fix it.
Yeah.
They want to. I was interacting with a person, and their grandson had a friend who was having some problems, and I gave the best advice I could, but it was like, one, I would need a lot more information to interact with this, but it's kind of several layers out there. Again, that may have been a very, very close situation. I'm not judging the situation. Very close situation where it was natural for this person to get involved, but sometimes people will take on things you're just saying, you know what, probably don't need to take that on.
Right.
Talk to that person a little bit.
Oh, I think there's lots of people like that, because I feel like they need to be involved in everything. And I think sometimes for that type of personality, they're getting something back from that. Maybe they're missing it in some area of their life, and maybe, the stranger or the, somebody else they can help. And I can understand that to some extent, because I feel like strangers listen to me more than my own family, right? So sometimes I get kind of a buzz out of that. It's like, oh, that person's listening to me. I must have something good to say. But some people really need that, so I would talk to that person and, and kind of find out what's going on in their life, what's maybe missing, what's that void that they need to solve everybody's problems. Because, there is some goodness to that, somebody wants to be a helper, but you can't do everything. And I think that's even important in the church, because I'm sure you come across people that feel like they have to say yes to everything, or maybe they're involved in every group. And what happens is you spread yourself too thin. You're not taking care of yourself, and you end up doing what you're involved in more harm, because you can't give it your full attention. And that would be the same with someone like that. Is are you missing something at home where you're not getting attention or you're not being heard? But it depends, because it could be a good thing.
Yeah.
And they would have to kind of be aware of how being involved in other people's problems could lead to burnout, because again, you go, and then, like with me, it's just that one little thing that happens, and then I'm down for the count for a day or two.
You mentioned something. There could be a whole area on church burnout.
Oh yeah.
So many people will get involved, and they'll be involved in all these ministries. And I've even told people before, I think you need to be at home more. You need to be with your family more. You're involved in, I'm serving the Lord, and my family's here, and they're supportive. And it doesn't always happen, but I've seen more cases than one where that person calls one day and says, I'm done. And then they're not involved in anything for a long time.
Right.
So, so you get to the point where the trigger causes an emotional meltdown, or
it could be,
and so you just think, I can't keep going like this. Any more red flags that we want to talk about before we get on the other side of burnout?
There's so many to look at. I think really what's important is to know yourself. And I would tell people that I work with is, know who you are inside, know behaviorally how you are, and when something kind of goes awry from that, check into it, because it could be something, that is burnout related, stress related, anxiety related. I'm very aware of my body as far as like how I feel. I know when I don't feel well. And it's because I'm kind of like one of those go, go, go kind of people. When I don't feel well, I really feel it. And whether it's emotionally, physically, spiritually, I feel it very strongly. So I'm able to kind of work on that. I don't always do it well because I'm human, but I do know enough about myself that I can pay attention to those things. And I think it would be good for other people to make sure they pay attention to themselves. Because you know yourself, you know what you're capable of to some extent, and I think a lot of people do know when they're overextending themselves because they start to feel it slowly.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that this ministry has, the Journey Ministry, that's changing its name
Living
to
Grounded.
Living
Right?
Grounded.
I love
yeah.
it. Yeah, I pay attention to that.
Yeah, well, good. Thank you. We have an assessment. It's not inerrant, and it's not made by a Christian organization, but it helps. It's called Culture Index. It helps you understand how you're wired. Mm-hmm. And I think about that a lot, and we'll help people with it if they want. But I think about that a lot because it has this thing called energy units. And the way you answer the assessment, I know there are probably 100 of these things,
sure.
right? But it tells you how many energy units you have. And the cool thing about that is the energy unit just means this is when I'm going to wear out at some point, and I need to do it. So it may just be, during lunchtime at work, I'm going to take a walk.
Right.
I'm going to do something to recharge. Mm-hmm. It's not a bad thing to have low or high energy units. It's just you need time to recharge. And I was thinking about that with the self-care, but you need to know that. Right. It's okay to do that.
Right.
This is how God wired me.
Right.
So now we're getting back to the spiritual. This is how God made me.
Right.
And he didn't make a mistake.
Right.
And he wired me different than someone else. And maybe they can go forever. I can't. That's fine. Mm-hmm. I get recharged, and then I'm, get back in the game. So it is good to be not self-absorbed and narcissist, all that stuff, but to be a student of yourself in order to serve God well and serve others well.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting to me that people do find things like self-care selfish, and I think that a lot of it is because they really are in maybe a caregiver type of role, and they need to get stuff done, and maybe originally they might think, oh, I'm okay. I really could use 5 minutes, but you know what? I'm not going to take it. I'm just going to power through it. Mm-hmm. But that, as you said, it doesn't last. And most people do need recharged. And there are people that can go. But even those people need time of self-care. We all do. And it is how God made us, And but people don't recognize it oftentimes till it's, I don't want to say too late, because you can rebound from burnout. Burnout's not the same as like a mental health diagnosis of anxiety, depression. I mean, it can be pretty bad, don't get me wrong, but burnout's not usually something that a psychiatrist would treat with a medication like we talked about in the last one. It's really, they're going to treat you, a counselor's going to treat you with learning skills and lifestyle changes. Mm-hmm. So, and part of lifestyle changes might mean you need to implement, taking that 5-minute shower, just to kind of relax, reading for a few minutes. And I really think that it's very important, and it is part of self-care, but it shouldn't be included in your self-care, is spending time alone with the Lord. Mm-hmm. That should be a definite, something you do regardless. And a lot of people really will, they'll neglect it. And I'll tell you, I've done it. I'm a big binge TV watcher. I hate to admit that, but I will get to the point where I need to relax after I've been busy, and I'll binge watch TV, and I'll be like, oh, I need to spend time with God, but just one more show, and then I'm tired, and my time with the Lord is kind of gone flat. It's not where it should be, And I think that's really important for people to know, especially, believers. We have to have that. We have to be in the Word. We have to be reading it. And you talked about this on Sunday, and my son texted me after, and he goes, I guess I need to be in the Word more. And I'm like, we all do, because that's where we have all of our answers. That's where we can find rest and peace that the world will call mindfulness, but I call it just spending time with God and just being in that moment.
Yeah. Our spiritual food, our mental
everything.
Help, our peace that only God can give.
Yeah.
Talk to this person. So this self-care is interesting because there will be some people who say, oh, self-care, that sounds selfish.
Right.
And I serve the Lord and he has me on this, and I'm serving my kids and I don't have time for self-care.
Right.
So I met with a guy for lunch, great time. And he said something that I hear so many people saying, and I think myself sometimes. He's going through some stuff, family stuff, and it's very stressful. And then he said, which I say sometimes, but man, I look at other people, and it's so much worse. So I can't even complain about what I'm doing. And I think, okay, it's there's always going to be someone that has a worse situation, always.
Right.
Howard Hendricks used to tell the story of a guy who died, and they were walking by the casket, and the wife was standing by the casket, and someone told the wife, well, it could have been worse. And he was like, well, how can it get worse than this? So there's a point where you're dead. It can't get any worse.
Right.
But during life, always someone's going to have something. So we would never deal with any stress at all because we would always say, well, man, look at Job. I lost I lost this, but I didn't lose 10 children and I didn't lose everything I had. So I can't complain. So talk to that person, bring that person back into, okay, a realistic mindset of self-care is not unbiblical.
Right.
Certainly, as you say, you got to be in God's word.
Right.
You got to be hearing from Him.
Right.
But He also talks, tells us that Paul says spiritual exercise is good for some things, not good for an eternity in heaven, but is beneficial. So talk about self-care to the person who's saying, boy, that just sounds unbiblical to me.
Right. Well, you could go back, and I know you've talked about this a lot of times with running the race, how there's a lot of analogies about your spiritual life, about running the race. You can't run a race. I know my daughter's training for a half marathon, and my husband's starting to train. You have to train. You have to train your body so that you can actually run the race. And that's, I guess, really what they're saying in the Bible about spiritually training your body so you can run the race. That's how life is. You have to prepare your body for life. And whether you think you need it or not, if you're going to experience stress, and it'll be at some point where it's too much. And, I feel sad for people that really feel like it might not be, biblical to do self-care, but I kind of think it is. Again, I go back to, why did Jesus need rest? Mm-hmm. He's the Son of God. Why did he need to go pray? He went away from the crowds. I imagine that 5,000 people would be overwhelming to me for sure, But I would say that, yes, maybe people do have it worse, but, God is calling you to take care of your body. It's the temple of the Holy Spirit, to take care of your family. So you have to train to do that. So you have to take steps to make sure that these things are good and okay. So self-care is one of them. I don't know how people don't do self-care, because they really are, I guess, the people that really don't care to, or maybe they don't understand or they don't know, that don't take care of themselves. You're going to see them in their old age having lots of issues, whether it be mental, whether it be physical, but it will happen. Self-care is vital, just like if you're taking vitamins, just as if you're eating right. And part of self-care is all those things: exercising, good nutrition, getting physical, seeing a doctor, that is also part of self-care. But, spending time in nature, taking a walk on the Montour Trail, taking a run, those are all part of, self-care. And I think that people maybe misjudge self-care and think that I'm going to go to a spa and spend 2 hours and lots of money on somebody pampering me. That is maybe for somebody, that's self-care, but that's not really kind of doable for everybody. So you have to kind of find what you can do as far as taking care of yourself, what you enjoy, things like that, and implement them in your life.
Self-care is not saying it's not selfishness.
Right.
It's part of the priorities of focusing our walk with God, focusing on our walk with God through His Word, through prayer, and taking care of all. It's stewardship, right?
Yeah.
It's taking care of. So when I was running a church staff, I used to say, "You can rest when you die." That's probably was that bad advice?
I've heard people say that before, but there is some truth to that, I guess.
Yeah, probably bad advice. I should. Probably a lot of people are in therapy because they worked with me.
But Pastor Ron said, I there's no time for resting. When I'm dead, I'll rest.
When I'm dead.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably true. But I mean, again, it's different for everybody, right? So it doesn't have to look the same, as far as resting, right? Again, you know yourself, you might be more able to charge your battery a little longer than other people, but it's good to know that, and so maybe for you, it doesn't look like you're resting. For me, on the outwards, they're like, well, she doesn't rest at all, but I need it.
Yeah.
I do need it.
So you hit the wall. Sometimes people will say, what does that mean? Well, you'll know it when it happens, right? So
yeah,
you know you've hit the wall. You just don't feel like you can go on. If you were saying you didn't feel like you could go out of your room for a while, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about recovery.
Yeah.
So now we're talking to the person that they would look back and say, yeah, that was a red flag and that was a red flag, but now, man, I'll use it. I'm burned out. I've hit a wall.
Right.
Okay, what do we do now?
Right. Well, like I said, for the first thing to do with someone who's burnout is to try to get their stress level down. So whatever that stress level looks like, and if your therapist's working for it, we're going to be talking about, what has led to the stress, because you're going to know. You're going to have an idea of what. You may not know it all or why, but you're going to know. So it is trying to get that stress level down, and you try for immediate, and you're going to have to do coping mechanisms. And sometimes, I know people don't like it, but sometimes it's going to be some deep breathing exercises. Sometimes it's going to be kind of learning time management skills or organizational skills, or, whatever that looks like to you as far as that treatment plan, because we use all these techniques in counseling, but reduce the stress. And then again, once you reduce the stress, it's time to make some changes. You kind of look for your stressors, look for your resources. And that's what I did. And I didn't even, it kind of came naturally to me, but I was feeling all these emotions, all these feels I was negative. The whole world was against me at this time, but Bill was one of my resources, and he was there to talk to me. I was able to reach out to him, and he was able to kind of wake me up out of, almost like, virtually slap me kind of a thing. Not slap me, I'm not suggesting that, but you know what I mean? Kind of like wake up kind of a thing. And that helped me, but then I had to go back to my own advice, where I was trying to go ahead and use some coping mechanisms, trying to regroup my mind and then do some lifestyle changes. And for me, that's what I needed to do, was set some boundaries. So for somebody that hits the wall, we want to get them back to that rest and digest, because their cortisol levels are probably off the charts. We want to get them back to that normal homeostasis kind of position in life, and we do that by using the coping mechanisms. And then we want to work on, okay, what can you change? So that's where you get to know the person, and you talk about, as a therapist, I would take a whole, mental health history, what they do in their family, their job, and then we try to make a plan. What can you do to cut back? Is there any way you can cut back? Can you delegate? Can you set boundaries? Let's look at your expectations. What do those look like? For me, that was one of my issues, is my expectations of how I was to receive other people, how they were to treat me was ridiculously off the charts, because that's just how I am. But I can't stay there. If I stay there, I'm going to go back into burnout and I'm just going to fall flat on my face. So I think it's really important for people to seek counseling really maybe before burnouts. I think people save counseling for when they're in distress, but, counseling is really good for people just to go in and talk, and whether that be a mental health therapist or, I'm sure you have a lot of people you talk to, and I think it's good to talk to somebody professionally before you hit that wall, if you can.
We're going to wrap up, and thank you so much, because we're going to bring you back, and
I can't wait.
We have a whole list of topics. One of the topics I want to talk about at some point is time management. When we do marriage classes, we'll say, hey, what's something we didn't cover? And the top one is time management. Yeah. I think people really struggle with that. So as we wrap up this question, what is in our nature to wait till there's a crisis to get help? Is that pride? Is it independence? But you and me, when people come in, not always, and there's always a relief when people come in and say, "Look, I'm not doing bad, but I just see some things. Can you help me here?" That's like, thank the Lord.
Right.
Why do we normally wait until it's like, I can't? I hit the wall. I'm at the bottom. I'm done. Now I think I need to go get help. Right. What's in the human psyche that does that?
So many. I think for some people it is pride. So if you have this, this man who is the breadwinner, he's got a demanding job, he is, a pillar of society in the church and all that. He doesn't want to be seen as being weak. I think that's for some people, if they seek out help, or they don't get help, it's because they don't want to feel weak. They don't want to be seen as weak. And that's not necessarily like that overarching thing that they're thinking about, but that is in the back of their head. For me, I think I feel like a failure if I'm not doing what I need to do. So many people rely on me, and I don't want to let them down. And I don't want to let my dad down. My dad needs a lot. There's a lot of pressure on me, I feel. And if there's nobody else to do it, then I'm going to let him down. If there's nobody else to watch my grandchild or whatever it is, take a meal to somebody, then I'm letting somebody down. And that, for me, I hate that feeling, because then it kind of makes me feel like I'm not a good person.
We are wired in a very complex. We are fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yes.
And there's a lot of complexity.
Very much so. In
our lives.
Everybody's different.
Yeah. Well, this has been fascinating. I could go on and on with this.
Yeah.
But if those listening or watching have questions, send them in, because Debbie has agreed to come on periodically. And we have our list, but we want you to give us a list. Here are some things. If you're listening, you say, hey, I'd love to hear Debbie talk about this issue or this thing. And you can get as personal as you want. We're not going to share your name or anything here, but I promise you, if you have that issue, a lot of other people do as well. Of course. So we want to be able to help you as much as possible.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's really cathartic for myself to talk about how I am, and it just shows that nobody's perfect.
Yeah, for sure. Would you pray for the person who says, "Oh man, a lot of the things I heard resonate. I can feel in my body, the fatigue, the mental tiredness, the short temper, the irritability, and I need to do something. I got to do some self-help in a biblical, spiritual way. Pray for that person if you would.
Yeah, sure. Oh, Father God, thank you for this time with Pastor Ron and talking about some of these issues, God, that we all face in life, God, because we are fearfully and wonderfully made, Lord, and that's how you made us, God, and we are just amazed at that. But Lord, some people have struggles, Lord, and they get kind of rewired, Lord, and they're burnout, they're stressed. There's new moms out there that just feel like they can't even go on another minute because they're so exhausted. I pray for them, Lord. I pray that they would be able to be more self-aware, that they would reach out for those resources in their life, God, that you would make those resources available to them and just kind of open their eyes to these situations. There's lots of people, Lord, who are struggling to balance work, life, family, and they need their jobs. They can't quit. They have difficult bosses and difficult environments that they work in. Lord, I just pray for your peace to be upon them and that you would provide them the answer and the way, God, for why they're in the situation they're in. And God, I just pray that for those people listening, that, Lord, if anybody needs help, that they can just reach out to Pastor Ron, reach out to me, Lord, that through you, Lord, through your word, that you could just give us the answers to help them to avoid burnout, and if they're in burnout, to recover from it. And Father, I just thank you and praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Debbie, thanks so much.
Appreciate you. I appreciate it too.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's podcast. So if any part of today's conversation resonated with you, just take a deep breath. You're not alone in feeling the way you're feeling. And there's nothing wrong with needing rest, needing some space, or even talking to someone about what's going on in your life. Burnout can feel pretty heavy, but just understanding it is a powerful first step toward healing. And again, your relationship with the Lord is always the main thing in bringing healing to your heart and to your body. Be gentle with yourself. Give yourself permission to slow down. And remember, you're allowed to care for yourself with the same kindness that you show others. Before we go, I want to thank our podcast team for making this episode possible. Our executive director is Jen Booth. Ryan Jorgen produces each podcast. Mark James delivers each podcast to you. Laura Crane promotes each podcast through social media. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Hit like. That simple tap helps us deliver our message to more and more people. Again, thanks so much for joining us on Living Grounded.